Yeah, we can start reading. So let's just say hello to everybody because we've been kind of chatting. Hello, everyone.
All right.
My camera's always so weird. I need to get a better webcam
Hey.
setup myself. But thank you. We're doing this virtually because I did have the vid as. um, so I'm better now, but just to play it safe this week, we're recording virtually, and the other recordings were pre-recorded before I got sick, and I kind of just stopped putting stuff out. So I apologize for the break that we had for about 2 weeks there, but we are back. We're going to be reading from Quest for Justice, and Hans, I think, is going to start off.
All right. So we are on, there's no chapter numbers, but the Kuru's Agent Provocateur. All right. So a quick review. Pandu and Madri had departed this world, and their bodies had been taken by procession down the Himalaya mountains to Hastinapur, accompanied by Queen Kunti and the 5 Pandava princes, the heirs to the Kuru throne. With their father gone, Dhritarashtra had become the Pandava's father by Dharma, but cares only about securing the throne for Duryodhana, his firstborn son. The threat is extreme, and Vidura has warned the Pandavas that there are plots afoot in the capital to have them killed. This brings us to Duryodhana, identified by expert astrologers as an extremely dangerous asura, someone who would bring down the entire Kuru dynasty if allowed to flourish. At the time of Duryodhana's birth, these same astrologers advised Dhritarashtra and Gandhari not to raise the child or let him anywhere near the throne. But the royal couple were too attached to their little son and refused to heed their warnings. The current danger to the Pandavas and their mother comes entirely from him, Duryodhana. Now, Duryodhana, who is roughly the same age as Bhima, is what you might call a precocious young asura. Although he and the Pandavas are now only around 13 years of age, he already bears his cousin terrible malice, bitterly resenting their popularity with the people. He's also already up nights thinking about the throne. Yudhisthira's claim is strongest because Pandu was the legitimate king, and Yudhisthira is the firstborn of the whole dynasty. Excuse me, flipping the page. These two factors undisputedly made him the rightful heir, apart from the fact that he's adored by the people who really want him to be king. Duryodhana can't stand any of this and becomes determined to eliminate all 5 Pandavas, beginning with Bhima. Duryodhana and Bhima, being the same age and being very competitive youths, had developed this perfection of sibling rivalries. Bhima, if you recall, was the son of Vayu, the wind god, so he was naturally the stronger of the two. When the Pandavas first came to Hastinapur, all of the princes would come together for childhood sports, and Bhima was always defeating Duryodhana. He was just too much to handle. This, of course, fueled Duryodhana's envy, which led to his first attempt on Bhima's life, cake laced with a lethal dose of poison. A popular name for Bhima, found in the Bhagavad Gita, is Vrikudara, or wolf belly, indicating that he had a voracious appetite and could literally digest anything. I mean, he alone could have kept the entire food industry in business. Oh, that's funny. Thus, although Bhima ate the poisoned cake, he apparently digested it with such gusto that it had no effect. Not to be deterred, Duryodhana quickly hatched another plot. One day, after a bit of sport, he and Bhima were relaxing on the bank of a river, and Bhima fell into a sound sleep, which he often did after a good meal. Having planned ahead for this chance, Duryodhana quietly tied Bhima up with what were supposed to be unbreakable ropes, then rolled him into the river to drown. But when he hit the water, Bhima woke up and snapped the ropes like cotton threads. Another failed attempt. Of course, Duryodhana was still only a budding young assassin, still hoping that practice would make perfect. But then something happened that postponed any further attempts on the Pandavas' lives. The arrival of one of the Mahabharat's most important characters, Drona, or Dronacharya, as he came to be known. And because of Dronacharya's prominence, I'll take a few minutes to tell you about the story. Dronacharya is like the guru of basically all of the world's most renowned martial artists at the time. So it was a huge deal for him to come in and train all of the princes and everything. Like so many others in the Mahabharata, Dronacharya had a very unusual and dramatic birth. Once the renowned sage Bharadwaj went to the Ganges to perform his daily ablutions. When he arrived, it just so happened that a beautiful Apsara named Gritachi was herself in the act of bathing. Seeing the beauty of the scantily dressed nymph, the sage became overwhelmed by desire and lost his semen, which he then preserved in an earthen pot, or drona. And that's because the yogis, that was considered to be like their vital life force. And so, anyway, it was, he did it as a way to kind of prevent himself from losing his Shakti, I guess, from, some of the other versions I've read.
Yeah, I mean,
it was from this semen.
Like a guy that had like sworn off all this stuff. I think at this point, right? He hadn't seen.
Oh yeah.
For years and years, and was very not in that realm. So, yeah. Anyway,
yeah. And it was from this semen that the powerful Brahmana Dronacharya was born. So it's interesting because, like, nowadays you have babies, being, you have in vitro fertilization, or babies that can be created in test tubes, and then, according to the Vedic scriptures, they were very scientifically advanced at the time. It was just not, at least from my understanding, it was, they considered sound vibration to be very, very powerful, which science also comes to the same conclusion. I mean, if you really delve into the metaphysics and quantum mechanics and stuff like that, there is a lot of things that science at that level has trouble, explaining. They have theories and hypotheses, but some of the things that they talk about like this, it's from one view, you could just say, oh, wow, yeah, that's so far-fetched and that's really out there. There's no way. But if you would have went back, 1,000 years or 2,000 years and told someone that they would be able to craft, or not craft, but, impregnate artificially an egg and then, implant it into the body of, they would look at you like you're crazy. So with that understanding, they, the yogis were really more like the nuclear physicists of the time. They just had an understanding of nature and the laws of nature in a way that we don't.
Well, also there's a lot of stuff
we
about
don't
mantras and sound.
Exactly,
and so,
sound vibration.
And when they've done studies that show, just on the simplest level, that vibration in general and energy does have an effect. Like if you put certain words on water, the water molecules change, like love versus hate. It's a very different. The actually cellular structure adjusts, or at least the way in which it's formed is adjusts. And when you play certain types of music, the water or any liquid, I think, but especially water because it's a very pure liquid, adjusts its.
They did it with snowflakes, right?
Yeah, it does.
You froze water
stuff
with different sound
if you
playing.
Freeze it while different sounds are playing, you see a very different situation going on with the same water from the same source, and they can replicate that. Like it keeps happening. It's not like a by accident. It happened one time in somebody's lab, and so it's very clear that sound affects cellular structure. Like it affects us on the smallest level. And so for us, yes, it's hard for us to really be like, really, they could just say something and then this magical-ish thing. You could say it's magic, but like you were saying, if somebody were
manipulating
to talk about
quantum mechanics.
they would call what you were just talking about witchcraft back in the day. They would have thought that was really
Exactly.
weird to be able to like do this insemination or whatever. Like that would have been you
Yeah.
would have been burned at the stake for even talking about it. So or
Yeah.
stoned is actually what was going on. They weren't really burning that many people. They were more stoning them to death, which is not necessarily better, but it's not good. But I mean,
I don't know
like,
which would be more fun.
yeah. But
Probably I'd go with the burning just because I think it'd be over quicker, but I don't know.
yeah, man, it would be painful until it was over. But yeah, I mean, both are painful. But I mean, my main point is just to say that, like, yes, it's hard for us to know, and I guess you couldn't theoretically say that there's no definitive way to prove in a physical sense
Or
that this for
disprove.
sure happened. But you also can't disprove it, and there is enough like that kind of thing proves that there's at least a theoretical possibility that if people knew these mantras, the right sound vibration at the used in the correct way, why couldn't it have done something molecularly
Perfect.
that could completely shift
Yeah.
something structure and
Completely
create
shift.
an arrow that would explode and destroy hundreds of people? Why not, if you just knew exactly what to do? Like, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, they call it, right, like the section of the Vedas. We also have to understand that the the Vedic scripture that has survived miraculously, I mean, quite intact. I mean, yeah, there has, just like anything else, it has been, bits lost through time, but considering this can be easily corroborated through astronomical data.
Yeah.
For example, like based on the astronomy given in the Vedic scriptures as to the date of Lord Krishna's birth, it puts him back at like 3228 BC. So that implies that either they at some point were writing down astronomical calculations and mastered it to such a point that they could back trace how the constellations would be 5,000 years ago. And then, like, when you really start to look at it from an analytical point of view, what is there in the Vedic scriptures? Yeah, some of it might sound poetic, but if you can read it and look at it with an open mind, you will quickly see, on a philosophical, a theological, metaphysical level, like their understanding of, like, if you really, really delve into it and you can see past some of the flowery, poetic nature of the verses, because that's the way that they carried on these oral traditions. The explanation for the different elements that make up the material nature, the division of the three modes of nature, the division of the soul, the false ego, the intelligence, the mind. Even if you look at it from a psychological point of view today, you know, uh, psychology really has only been around majorly for like 60 years, and now we have many psychologists coming out and advocating the strength and the power of meditation and the strength of mantra meditation and these other things to help deal with, or many cultures with their psychedelic rituals and stuff that was meant to keep them in contact with a spiritual higher nature that for the last 2,000 years we've kind of lost. And
I think
it's easy to dismiss things.
The higher beings that are talked about in these stories come off like, can sound very fantastical. You're talking about this dude who has an elephant head. You're talking about these different beings that come from another planet just so casually, like this Apsara just kind of was down in this river, but she's from like another place, another planet, a heavenly planet. And, it's like, okay, sure, like, maybe. But then, you think about the idea of like Jesus was the Son of God. He came from another realm, technically. He did come and take birth here, but his soul came from another place. He came with a message, he was sent with a message from God. He's the Son of God. So like in that way, there's other things that people are willing to believe that we've just been told, that we don't really think about the nature in which, or like all the details oriented to it. And then we'll hear something else that is not altogether that different and dismiss it because it's not something we've been told our whole life. We haven't heard about the
or society
demigod.
doesn't say it, therefore I don't want to agree with it because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. And the interesting thing is that it takes just as much faith to not believe in it as it does to believe in it, because you're placing your faith in. I'm not saying science is bad. I'm a huge scientist. I mean, I work in healthcare. I analytically minded. I want things presented to me logically. However, if you look at the world around us logically, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that science, hard, materialistic, a reductionist science does not explain everything in your in your everyday experience.
Every few years we're discovering new things. Like even the higher beings.
Well, no, I mean not even that, but I mean just in like your actual experience, like you don't even.
I've never seen a
when you
zebra.
really start to think about when you start to think about consciousness, I mean, science cannot. They have no answer as to what consciousness is. They have no way to prove what consciousness is, and like if in that YouTube series they have the Atma paradigm.
Yeah.
I find that absolutely fascinating because they are presenting these devotee scientists. They're presenting the theory of it's really a scientific theory on the both the physical and metaphysical world around us, and it explains so many of the things that mainstream science does not have any evidence for. You also can't prove empirically that the Atma paradigm is is fact to someone else. It requires you to become the scientist and to do the experiments yourself to determine, okay, does the Atma paradigm make sense? Does it make sense that I'm a spirit soul and really I'm actually just the watcher of everything happening to me? I'm the watcher of my own thoughts. I'm the watcher of my own feelings. That's what they mean by the soul, is the being inside, deep, deep, buried beneath everything, that even when your life is falling apart, even when you're dying, even when you're in a total tailspin, or whether you're very successful, that part of you that's not affected by anything is you. And they're, anyway, it's something that when we go about our daily life, and this is why we kind of try to do our stuff on Instagram and inspire, if we're able to, people to take up yoga, or at least to ask questions about this stuff, because you get lost in the hustle and bustle of your daily life. It becomes so easy. We're already stressing out about so much shit. The idea of trying to sit there and think about your position in the universe and what your life is all about, like, that is quite overwhelming for a lot of people. And so that's really why we end up drowning out the noise, which is our actual essence that is screaming out, hey, like something isn't right here. And we drown it in alcohol, we drown it in TV, video games, drugs, sex, work, love for our family. Even that is something that we are using to drown out, trying to like actually figure out what our life is all about. Yeah. And when it's only, and Prabhupada says, it's only when we start asking those questions that we even begin human life, because otherwise we're no different than an animal. And it's like, it gets really heavy when you think about those things, but it actually is relieving at the same time, because it also helps you like shake off the burden of so many of the everyday stresses that you have.
Well, yeah.
Anyway,
and circling back onto the higher beings things, the point I wanted to make before I forget is that the other thing about this idea that we can't see them, we can't interact with them now, we don't know, whatever, it sounds very UFO-y. At the same time, there are things that we can't
Oof.
see. We get like night vision goggles. We get, infrared goggles. We have these things that allow us to
Mm-hmm.
see different spectrums that change the way our vision work. Our eyes work in a very certain spectrum, and that's it. Our ears, even, there's things dogs can hear that we can't hear.
Yeah.
So for us to think that
Different frequency.
right, and we figured out how to maybe measure some of those frequencies, but really we think we can somehow measure all the frequencies, even ones that we have no idea exist and don't know
Yeah.
that some other, maybe some, like he's just like, how would we possibly do that? We don't even know how to quantify how much is outside of our senses perception.
Yep.
So for us to really think that, like, we're, first of all, our lives are nowhere near perfect enough as a human for us to think that we're really the highest thing ever. I mean, really, come on, like, we're not living that kind
Not
of
to mention,
life.
not to mention the instruments we're using to even measure these other spectrums are made with human senses,
yeah.
which are inherently imperfect.
Yep.
So how do we even know that the instruments we're using are actually 100%?
Right. Well, you have to control the variables by the very rules of science in order to know that the outcome is correct. And if you can't
Yes,
control
but
the variables, then sometimes you have an uncontrollable
yeah,
variable, but that means that your result is a little less sturdy, a little less, like, foundational.
well, of course, and the problem is
You're
there
a
is
human,
a
you're a
uncontrolled
human mind.
variable that
Yeah.
there's an uncontrolled variable that no science can actually account for in any experiment, which is consciousness. And
Yep.
the you know and this is the funny thing is they try there's a famous quote to kind of sum this up. I can't remember who it was by or verbatim, but in trying to analyze what is life, you keep looking and breaking it down smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you're left with, protons, neutrons, electrons. But now you're like, wait, but this doesn't add up. Like, there's no, I guess the best way to describe it is like mainstream Newtonian Darwinian science, or that paradigm. They liken the universe to like a pool table, and everything's just kind of bouncing around mindlessly, accidentally, like it. Yeah. And then also when they refer to different planets too, like, you could say, what are you talking about, planets, or is that just a translation? Maybe I take it to mean different planes of existence. I mean, that's not to say some of them don't come from other planets, but
Yeah.
there's just, I find that suspending disbelief, you are able to learn so much more from reading this stuff. These
Yeah.
this
Well,
knowledge, that if you put up a wall because it sounds so far-fetched, oh, no, you're really like doing yourself a disservice, and you're not tapping into something that really could expand your awareness. I'm not saying you have to believe it when you read it, but it at least makes you think about a whole different
in a
view
sense,
of the
everything
world.
we don't know is something new, in a sense. Something that we're not, like, if you don't already know something and you're presented with something new, even like someone, let's say if we didn't have so much internet, somebody could talk to you about a giraffe or an elephant. And I've never actually seen a giraffe, I don't think, maybe in a zoo when I was really little, but like, if there was no, like you could hear about some creature that you've never seen and be like, that's nonsense, just because you've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have internet, we can verify other things that other humans have seen. But again, that's just a slightly wider pool. It's not the widest pool possible.
Yeah.
And I think just at least thinking like, okay, what's possible that it could happen? And the higher entities, like we call it answers for life. Like, if you're messing with an ant, or if an ant is on my desk, or if an ant is like on your chair and you're sitting outside, the ant has no idea that you and I are recording a Zoom thing. The ant has no idea that you even exist. If you were to,
it's a whole nother level of consciousness.
If you shook the chair, the ant thinks there's an earthquake or whatever sense, like, it's like, oh my God, I got to get safe. Like, I'm being like, the whole earth is shaking. Like, it doesn't have the perception to understand that you're an entity and you're moving the earth. And so, or the chair. And so in that sense, like, or when you're digging and you hit like an hidden ant hill, again, like it's like, you know, the ant doesn't realize that, like, the ants are just like, oh my god, we're like the earth is coming apart. Like they don't know
Yeah,
that it's
yeah.
you and you're an entity. So for us to be like, well, how could there possibly be these entities? You know, it's like the, you know, angels or demigods, they're carrying out the wishes of the, you know, supreme entity, and
The
they are
higher
doing the
power.
higher power, the universe, whatever you want to call it. And then these entities, like, yeah, they are in charge of the wind or the earth, just like we are able to affect those things on a smaller scale. But for like an ant, it seems we could be considered gods in a sense, like they, if they even realize we
Yeah.
existed, but they probably don't. And so in that
You
way,
give
it's
them
like,
food, you give them water, you bring the
yeah.
destruction.
How could there
You're
not be an entity that we just have no perception of, an inability to understand, that has some control or some ability to manipulate these events and has some responsibility regarding them? We would never know.
Oh, for sure. No, that's a very good point. And the interesting thing is, like, one of the things that kind of, I think, was a turnoff for many of the intellectuals in like Greece and Rome back in the day was the concept they had of their pantheon.
Hmm.
And really, if you look historically at the pantheon, they were all based on Vedic demigods. You know,
Yeah.
the same, different names, same roles.
Yeah.
However, the difference is in Greek history, or in Greek mythology and Roman mythology, their gods were their demigods, because they weren't really the creators. They were like, they were demigods. They lorded it over men, but they were not. They didn't follow dharma, and that's the difference, I think, between, that's the thing that they're missing, which then made people turn away from them and towards Christianity and the Abrahamic religions, because that's like, okay, this makes more sense. There's one God, and he's, you know, but even then, this whole idea of a wrathful, judgmental God came over from the Roman beliefs, you know, the angry Zeus. So now it's no longer Zeus. Now it's God, you know, Jesus' father. He's going to cast you into fire and burn.
Yeah.
But they were missing the idea that the demigods follow the nature's laws just like we do,
Yeah.
but they're just on a different scale. And because they also are subject to dharma and to nature's laws, they do rule over everything, but they're not, you know, hey, you know what? You guys pissed me off. You didn't sacrifice something to me. I'm going to send a tornado to your town. And like, it's not like that.
Or the
And
couple of times in the stories that it was like that, and they lost their head, got a little egotistical, then someone came and corrected them.
of course, and then someone comes and corrects them.
Yeah. It's like
Generally,
Christian.
God
Yeah.
comes
God.
and puts a foot down, saying, hey, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I find it really, it's interesting because people, you know, a lot of new agey people, oh, karma, cool, but like, you can't take some of the aspects of Vedic knowledge or Vedic wisdom, Vedic thought, and kind of like, oh, yep, I'm adding this to my belief system, but I'm going to leave out the other stuff because that just doesn't jive. It's like, you got to take it all at once. You got, you know, for it to actually start to make sense to you,
Yeah.
we have to read, we have to be open-minded. Not that you have to believe it, but just for it to make sense, you need to understand all of what's going into it, you know, spiritually, you know, metaphysically, psychologically. And if you look at the big picture of what the Vedic scriptures offer, it's like, um it's super. Anyway, we've
Yeah.
been rambling.
Yeah, I think the same thing with yoga. You start with physical yoga, and then there's all these other levels of yoga. Physical yoga is like literally the beginning. It's like getting on the boat, but the boat never leaves the harbor. You're just like, oh, this is cool. I'm eventually going to go somewhere, but you don't take it to the next step. You know, like physical yoga is nice. There's a lot of balance and benefit to it, and you get something
Mm-hmm.
out of it, and it helps you get your life a little bit. And it's like a baby step in the right direction, because there's so many other layers of yoga that that's meant to
Yeah.
help you with the deeper layers of yoga, that, you know, when you learn how to like do that with your mind and body, it helps your mind be focused on something and gives you more peace. But then there's something else to do with that peace and to gain even more peace, even more
Yep.
centered and balanced. And it's like a lot of right now, Westerners love the yoga, but they're just doing this very like beginning aspect of it, which
surface
there's nothing
level.
wrong with that. I don't mean that in a very negative way. I just mean that, like, if that's helping you, the rest of the yoga would blow your mind.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
bhakti yoga, the yoga of love, it doesn't mean like some weird orgy yoga, just to put that out there, just in case.
No.
But the yoga of love, I mean like literal love, like actual love, not lust or attachment or possession.
Pure selflessness.
Actual like love, like that's like the deepest level. And of course, there's varying levels between. And I'm not expert because that's why we're doing this, because we're just learning ourselves more about the details and stuff. But attempting to understand these other things. And, if you're into yoga, that's great, because that may help you to then think about these other things and focus inward and be able to take yourself to the next level even easier. Like yoga is a part of the process, but it's not just for bending and, doing handstands. It's to get your mind and soul right at the same, as long as your body, but you have to go deeper than just the poses. The poses themselves don't lead you to liberation. I'm gonna put it that way.
No. I mean, the poses are literally there just to help keep your body limber so that you can sit down in one spot without moving for hours. That's the whole point of the physical part of yoga. So your body isn't sending aches and pains to distract you, and you can just completely absorb yourself in meditation. So yeah, if you're doing the physical part of the yoga, I mean, yeah, it's great for your health, but if you're not absorbing yourself in meditation, and you can absorb yourself in meditation, all these motivational speakers are, that's where they're going to sit there and meditate on success, meditate on getting rich, meditate on winning the Super Bowl, meditating on whatever. But as bhakti yogis, we choose to meditate on how can I love, today, what can I do to serve Krishna, to serve the Supreme Lord? What can I do to serve his servants? What can I do to help make somebody else happy? That is the essence of bhakti yoga. It's, we don't want anything in return. We only want to live to serve others, because we understand that serving others is even more important than serving the Lord, because by serving the Lord's servants, we are serving him, and that actually makes him more happy. Just like someone comes over and gives my kids a present and they're, nice and show kindness to them, I'm going to really, really have some affection for that person, even though I may not know them.
Yeah.
More so than if they came up and just, were nice to me.
Yeah.
And it does, you're right, it does scare people. But the thing is, that's why it takes practice. When you're happy, if think about, you're doing something for someone you love, right?
You're always happier. Always happier.
You're always happier. Oh, I'm making this cake for my mom. She worked so hard. She's going to blow her mind. Oh, right. You're not thinking about how much it sucks. Time is flying. You're not even noticing time go by because you're so absorbed in thinking about the person that you love.
Absolutely.
And that's really what we're doing, but with God. And when we understand that every spirit, soul inside of all other living creatures, that is God. It is like the spirit's spark it's a small fragment of God. So we really should be treating each other, treating everyone like it is, the good Lord himself, walking around. Ideally, that's what a purely self-realized bhakti yogi does. Someone like Narada Muni, they really understand that on a level that is just, not even,
we all experience it. You search for your own happiness constantly in things you're doing. A lot of times when we try to do something that we think is going to be really nice for us, if we do something for I'm talking about like taking a day for yourself. I'm talking about like, you're really like attached to a certain result for yourself. You like want to go out and have this party thing and it's supposed to be just right. Normally that does not go that way. Very rarely do you actually have that fantastic time you were trying to have because you made it about yourself. But like you're saying, when you do it for your mom or you do it for your friend or whatever, a lot of times those are the best days because you planned it for someone else. And if everybody's doing it like that, you're doing a service, like then people are going to, it's automatically going to come back to you. People are going to serve you.
Yeah, too. It is. They're going to reciprocate with you.
You can't do it for that because then it's not really service. It's a very tricky thing, but
it is.
We all have had moments.
It has to be genuine.
And that is always so much more enjoyable than the rest of our miserly lives where we're trying to like bean count and trade favors and do like this,
Yep.
like I need to get mine. And then a lot of times we
You
don't
owe
get
me
ours.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't get ours
No,
until
for
we let
sure.
go. And then we get so much night when we're not trying to have a good day, we'll have the best day ever. And then we're like, oh, I'm gonna have a great
Oh
day
no,
today.
I know.
Never goes that way.
It's amazing. Yeah, when you want it, it ain't when you want it, yeah. It's
Yeah.
you know what it is? It's like trying to grab smoke.
Yep.
There's all these nice little patterns in the air. Oh man, I want to grab onto that. As soon
Yep.
as you grab it, it destroys it and
Yep.
it's gone. You have to enjoy it. And that's really where that's that state of meditation where you can achieve it like at 24 hours a day, and it is just, practicing living in the moment and being totally aware of the fact that I am a spirit soul, and I'm not, these emotions are coming and going, and I'm watching them come up and I'm watching them go away. Oh, I'm angry. Why am I angry right now? What, like,
Yeah.
if we try to detach ourselves from that, it takes the power those emotions and things have over us. It takes away that. And but that is something really hard to do, and it requires discipline. And that's why these yogis, they go to like these insane, live in the mountains, eat twice a week or once a week, and all this crazy shit. But it just goes to show you, look at Dronacharya's father. All it took was one day. He sees a half-naked girl in the river, and right.
Yeah.
So all of that austerity he did.
Yeah.
And this is why these stories happen, is to show us that, look, man, what you do that, or look at the devotees in Vrindavan. They're going about their life doing whatever, they're not living in a freaking cave up in the mountains.
No, that's not our goal. Our goal is to follow Dharma and to live life, but make it a service. That's the whole point of this. It's not supposed to be a monk in a cave somewhere. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Go ahead and keep reading. I'm just gonna grab water, but I can hear you as you read from the kitchen.
Okay. Brahmanas, as you know, are the teachers, the professors of Indian civilization. And just as modern universities have specialized professors teaching of knowledge, the Brahmanas of ancient Vedic culture also had their areas of expertise, Dronas being the military sciences, martial arts, weapon skills, military strategy, and so on. In the rendering of Drona's story, there's a popular Hindu misconception that I'd like to rectify by providing some additional information. While attending school, Gurukula, as a child, Drona, a Brahmana, became close friends with a young boy named Drupada, who was a Kshatriya by birth and heir to the throne of Panchala. After the Kurus, one of ancient India's most prominent dynasties, Drupada and Drona were children of the same age, and Drupada, feeling great affection for his friend, promised that when he grew up, he would share all that he had with Drona. Years later, when the two actually had grown up and Drupada was king of Panchala, Drona went to Drupada's palace to remind the king of that childhood pledge and to request his share of the kingdom. Obviously taken aback by this sudden appearance and outrageous demand, Drupada barely acknowledged their old friendship and basically told Drona, I'm not really into splitting Panchala in two right now, so that would be a no. Things went back and forth for a while, with Drupada even demeaning Drona, saying, if you beg like a proper Brahmana, I can arrange for a little something before you go. Drona, of course, refused and quickly left the palace, but not without harboring terrible thoughts of revenge. Here we come to the correction I mentioned earlier. In the more colloquial versions of Drona's visit to Panchala, Drona is portrayed as a penniless Brahmana seeking a way out of poverty. In fact, if you look at the various renderings that have gradually crept into diverse Mahabharata manuscripts, there is even one version in which Drona's little son is crying for milk that his father can't supply. So yeah, just kind of really milking it. Okay.
Yeah.
But all the other kids have milk. I know, son, but we're poor. We just can't afford milk. Supposedly, it was this milk incident that finally drove Drona to Drupada's palace. But when we consider certain facts found in the Mahabharata, this woeful tale of poverty simply doesn't wash. It couldn't have been what happened, and here's why. Drona married a wonderful lady named Kripi.
Kripi,
yeah. Kripi, who had a twin brother named Kripa. These twins had a truly mystical birth, after which they were adopted by none other than the great Kuru emperor Shantanu, that is, Bhishma's father. husband of Satyavati, father of Bhishma, grandfather of Pandu, and great-grandfather of the 5 Pandavas themselves. As the story goes, sage Gautama's grandson, Sharadvan, was born with arrows, meaning that he was born a great archer, after which, with maturity and practice, he became even greater. But when he performed yoga penance to become the greatest archer of all, Indra felt threatened and sent the celestial nymph Janapadi to divert the celibate youth. Distracted by the beautiful lady, Sharadvan lost control, abandoning his weapons, and retreated into the forest to undergo more penance. Before leaving, however, his semen fell on wayside weeds, dividing them in two. From these, boy and girl twins mystically took birth. Interesting. At around this time, Shantanu was hunting in the forest and happened upon the infant twins. Realizing that they were born of a great sage, he named them Kripa and Kripi, took them back to his palace, and raised them as his own. The male twin, Kripa, eventually became the great Kripacharya, one of the supreme generals of the Battle of Kurukshetra, while his sister, Kripi, married Drona, which brings us back to my setting the record straight. So basically, they were part of the royal family.
Yeah.
There's no way they wouldn't have been being taken care of.
Yeah.
The important point is that in marrying Kripi, Drona actually married into the richest family in the world at the time. And there is another factor that weighs against the notion that Drona was an impoverished Brahmana. The powerful martial avatara, Parashuram, upon retiring from further warrior-like activities, awarded Drona all of his supernatural weapons. Damn. So here we have Drona, who not only marries into the fabulously wealthy Kuru dynasty, but also receives these extraordinary weapons from none other than Parashuram himself. Given this, does it really make sense that Drona would have difficulty paying for the ancient equivalent of a carton of milk? Not at all. At least not to me. Makes sense. In fact, when Drupada rebukes Drona, refusing to give him half of his kingdom, Drona immediately heads for Hastinapur, the great Kuru capital, where he is warmly received. With his deep family connections, his vast knowledge of martial arts, and the mystical weapons of an avatar, all he has to do is basically show up and he's completely endowed. Wow. It really kind of makes you think, like, King Drupada was an idiot to turn him away like that.
Yeah, I don't
It's
know
like
what
one
his
of the most
deal
powerful
was.
warriors on the planet. The story of Drona's Hastinapur arrival is the stuff of old Hollywood swashbucklers, heroic, dashing, and wonderful. As he enters the city, Drona sees the Kuru and Pandava princes puzzling over the retrieval of a ball, which had fallen into a well during play. They're all gathered around the well when young Drona walks up, bows, and asks them to step aside. He withdraws an arrow, readies his bow, and shoots down into the well, piercing the ball. I'm assuming it was like not a ball filled with air.
Yeah.
Okay. Then he shoots a second arrow, which hits exactly into the back of the first, and then another and another and another, each of which does the same in its respective order. In this way, Drona creates a literal chain of arrows to the top of the well, which he uses to easily extract the ball. Then he casually turns to the wide-eyed princes and asks, "Anything else?" The boys, of course, are astonished at this feat of archery and ask, "Who are you?" Drona responds, "Go find Grandfather Bhishma and tell him what you have seen. He will tell you who I am." Since Pandu's death, Pitamaha Bhishma had been overseeing the kingdom, acting as regent until the heir comes of age. So all the princes run to tell Bhishma what they saw, and he immediately says, "Oh, that's Drona." Shortly after his arrival, Drona is made headmaster of... Okay, so he's like, he's Dumbledore.
Yeah.
Shortly after his arrival, Drona is made headmaster of the Royal Military Academy and charged with training the Pandavas and Kurus in military science. He also got a nice little palace and all the milk he could drink. Here I can tell a wonderful story about Drona's teaching method and the exceptional attributes of Arjuna. This is really inspirational, and I like to tell this story to Shruti and Veda. To test his students, Drona created a small mechanical bird and placed it in a tree. He then called each of his students to shoot an arrow through the eye of the bird, beginning with Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira, come forward. Do you see the tree containing the bird? Yes, master. Do you see the bird? Yes. How about me? Do you see me? Yes, I see you. Thank you. You may sit down. In this way, Drona summoned each and every prince, asked the same series of questions, got the same series of answers, and then told each to please sit down. Finally, it was Arjuna's turn. He came forward, and Drona asked, do you see the tree? To everyone's complete puzzlement, with the exception of Drona, Arjuna answered, no. Well, do you see the bird? Not at all. What? He doesn't see the bird? How about me? Do you see me? No, sir, I do not. Well, what do you see? Only the eye of the bird. Immediately, Drona commanded, shoot. Arjuna fired his arrow, piercing the eye of the mechanical bird. This story is often used to exemplify the single-pointedness that is required for success in spiritual life. Damn right. Dude, when I was in the army, every time we'd go to the range and go shooting, I would always meditate on that story before I got up to shoot. And I would do some yoga breathing, and I would pray to Arjuna and recite all of his names before I shot. And I'm gonna tell you something, dude. It like, I mean, sorry, not tooting my horn, but I mean, trying to keeping that state of mind, or trying to achieve that state of mind when I would shoot, made all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to be able to cultivate that in whatever you're doing, not just shooting. But Arjuna, who is destined to become the greatest archer of his time, saw only the target and nothing else, just as the serious spiritual practitioner must see only the goal, without diversion to anything else. So here we have just one example of the type of training these princes received, and it becomes even more interesting when you remember that none of them were ordinary human beings. Neither the Pandavas, who were the sons of the Suras, nor Duryodhana and some of his brothers, who were themselves Asura insurrectionists. All of them had incredible powers, and Drona continued to train them. At a certain point, he deemed them fit and ready for graduation. At this point, two highly significant events will occur that will have great bearing on the remainder of the Mahabharata. The first involves the collection of Drona's Guru Dakshin, a type of tuition or gift that is offered to the teacher when training is complete. The student must obtain the Dakshin, and the Guru has the right to ask for whatever he wants. The second occurs at the prince's graduation ceremony. Naturally, after you send your kids to school, you want to go to their graduation. So there's going to be a graduation ceremony, and something very amazing will happen there. Before graduation, however, comes the Dakshina, and what a vengeful Dakshina Drona has in mind. Boys, he says, I've awarded you these fantastic weapons, and I've endowed you with tremendous expertise in their use. Now I want you to invade the kingdom of Panchala, defeat Drupada, and secure his kingdom for me. That is my Dakshina. Damn, bro.
Oh man.
That's where that's where the dark side got him.
Yeah.
Drona's demand was particularly hard on the Pandavas because, as we learn from the text, Drupada was one of their father's dearest friends, practically a member of the Pandu family. Now they had to hand him a stinging, humiliating defeat, and for a Kshatriya to be so defeated was literally worse than death. Krishna even mentions this in the Gita. Sambhavitasya chakirtir maranad atirichyate. For the highly esteemed, Sambhavitasya, infamy, akirti, is worse than death. Maranad atirichyate. So on the other hand, there was this old family friend, and on one hand, there was this old family friend, and on the other, there was the order of the Guru, which was so sacrosanct in ancient Vedic civilization. As conflicted as the Pandavas must have been, they had no choice. They had to follow their Guru's command. They attacked the kingdom of Panchala, soundly defeating Drupada. Now, if we recall the last time Drona and Drupada had met, We can just imagine the scene that's about to unfold. After getting the expected good news, Drona comes before a terribly humiliated Drupada and says, "You know, I'm such a nice guy that I'm going to do for you what you wouldn't do for me. I'm going to give you back half your kingdom." And he really meant it. God, that is just, dude. For for a warrior, you got your ass whooped, defeated, and according to the one version of Mahabharata that I've often read, the Pandavas and the Kauravas each had their own army.
Yeah.
And so the Kaurava army went to fight Drupada first, and Yudhisthira and the Pandavas stayed back. And Yudhisthira basically said, "Let's let them go do it." They got their ass whooped by King Drupada, and they came running. And then the Pandavas and their army went forward, and they spanked, and they tied up Drupada and brought him bound with ropes before Drona. And he then untied him and then gave him back his kingdom. So it was like, ouch.
Yeah, that's
and on top of that, according to that version, and you know, it also made, you know, total humiliation to the Kauravas, made the Pandavas look good, and
yeah,
you know, just kind of all just anyway.
yeah, for
Not
sure.
having much of a choice, Drupada swallowed his pride, bit his tongue, and took back half of Panchala, his ancient family dynasty. But from that day forward, he had only one thought in mind: revenge, meaning the killing of Drona. This incident highlights an unflattering aspect of Drona's character, a flaw that Bhima himself would point out during the Battle of Kurukshetra. Drona was a Brahmana, receiving the honors of a Brahmana, and yet he had a Kshatriya-like political ambition. In the Vedic system, there's supposed to be a clear separation between the two. The Brahmanas receive great honor and esteem in society precisely because they're in higher states of consciousness, detached from worldly affairs. To accept such honors while simultaneously harboring political ambitions is hypocritical, problematic, and potentially compromising. Yep. In Drona's case, his own political aspirations will lead him to fight and kill for the wrong side in the battle between the Kurus and the Pandavas. Be that as it may, Drona has exacted his revenge by humiliating Drupada and taking the kingdom of Panchala. And Drupada is completely depressed at having lost family lands and getting your ass spanked. And he's not interested in half a kingdom. He wants the entirety of Panchala restored to his rightful rule. But he's depressed because he realizes that neither he nor his sons will be able to defeat Drona's vast Brahminical and military power. So Drupada makes a fateful decision. If his Kshatriya power is of so little value that he can lose his throne and be utterly humiliated by a so-called Brahmana, he will leave for the forest to find some sage with the yogic potency to deal with the problem of Drona. For the time being, however, let's leave Drupada to his search and return to Hastinapur, where the Pandavas had not yet heard of Drupada's decision. Having paid their Guru Dakshina by humiliating one of their father's dearest friends, all because of Drona's political ambitions, it was now time for the graduation ceremony. I guess everyone here has been to at least one of these milestone events, whether in a modern or in an ancient context. It's a time of great joy, celebration, and family pride. Some things never change. Dhritarashtra even built a special arena for the occasion. Of course, during the ceremony, all the princes got the chance to show their families what they learned in school, exhibiting their different martial skills, using their various weapons, and so on. Arjuna in particular displayed amazing skills with all types of regular and mystical weapons. He could perform remarkable feats with arrows, release weapons with mantras, manipulate the physical elements, and so on. Yeah, and these weapons that they used, they're very interesting because, for example, right, like the Brahmastra, the Brahmastra was one of the most potent weapons in the universe, or in the world.
Yeah.
And it was known only to a very select few individuals. But basically, what it was was a mantra that was chanted, so sound vibration, which imbued it didn't even have to be a weapon necessarily. It could be a blade of grass. It could be anything. But you would, through the manipulation of sound
Yeah.
via mantra, you could actually create nuclear fission.
Yeah.
So they were nuclear weapons.
They found evidence of ancient nukes, actually. They found places that the only thing they can
Yeah.
describe it as a nuke must have gone off there thousands of years ago. But of course, supposedly there was no such scientific ability. Yet there's places that they can't fully explain beyond
There's
saying
places in India actually
fission
where,
happened.
yeah, they have like intense radiation, coming out of the rocks. Granted, you can't necessarily say, oh yeah, for sure, but
There was some place that like got all the black glass that happens from sand when sand's like when they like detonated on the ground that one time got that glass. They found that somewhere. It's like more south though. I don't think it was in India. It was like, I don't want to say like in the area of Thailand. I can't remember where, but like in that part of the world somewhere. I don't remember the exact location, so maybe I shouldn't even bother saying it. But they found something like that somewhere where they're like, it looks like a nuke detonated on the ground here, like. Just like, and then we read these stories that they say are just fictional, but then they talk about these weapons that literally explain what we find. But it's just a coincidence. Yeah.
Not to mention, like, though I was explaining to Shruti, right? Like scientists, I really like listening to Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like they discovered this site 10, 15 years ago, Göbekli Tepe, which is like proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was 12,000 years old.
Yeah.
Which mainstream science says, no, human civilization, max 6,000 years old.
Yep.
Right? And Göbekli Tepe comes along and totally shakes them. But the thing is, if you read many of these stories, most of the civilized, first off, with the Ice Age and there was a meteor that hit Earth about 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That completely decimated North America. The impact from that is one of the of.
Hold on a second, Hans. I lost you for the past 30 seconds. I said that you said the impact of the Ice Age. You said the impact of that was, and you glitched out.
Oh, the impact of that crater or that meteor, which they found in, I think it was the Gulf of Mexico somewhere.
Yeah.
Or up in no, it was up in Canada, maybe somewhere. Anyway, so we find all these, the cavemen and the these people that put cave paintings and the hunter-gatherers, and if you read in like the Vedic scriptures, those were considered the uncivilized barbarians that were kind of left out in the woods, like people, whatever. They're just like today, there's tribes in the Amazon we don't really mess with. Leave them alone, and civilized world goes on without them. And it was the same way. All of the civilized people of the time, they burned their bodies, they cremated, and because they weren't so caught up in a mechanical, technologically based society, it was more of a metaphysically advanced society. So of course, naturally, there's going to be less, maybe, evidence of stuff. Not to mention, I mean, like it blows my mind. I mean, there's so much ocean all around the world. The Sahara Desert, God knows what's buried under there. The Amazon jungles, the rainforests, and like I find it so funny that scientists are so easy to dismiss anything that doesn't line up with their little conservative view of, it's because they want to feel like we're so smart nowadays. No one could possibly have been smarter than us, and it's like,
oh yeah, it's definitely an ego thing.
It's such a narrow way of thinking.
None of us want to be wrong on a large scale or on a smaller scale. It's just the way we tend to be. We all are attached to being right, and the scientific movement is just as attached as everybody else. Finish up this next 2 paragraphs, and I'll pick up at the bottom of the page 119.
Okay. Yeah, I got to go soon. Of course, during the ceremony, all the princes got the excuse me. Okay. Indeed, all the princes could manipulate the physical elements, creating water, creating fire, moving earth, and so on, because back then there was the type of martial yoga. And under Drona's tutelage, the Pandava and Kuru princes had actually acquired these amazing weapon siddhis, or perfections. Let's digress for a couple minutes to talk about how these mystical powers work. Cool, I'm happy he's diving into this. It's an interesting topic. In the Sanskrit literature, for example, you frequently read about great sacrifices where empowered brahmanas are able to do almost anything with sacrificial fire. They can create things, they can destroy things, they have almost unlimited power. A key to figuring out how these yogic abilities worked is found in the Vedic notion that all things in existence are interconnected, an idea borrowed by James Cameron for his film Avatar. And to understand the notion of interconnectedness, we can turn to Krishna's statements in the Bhagavad Gita, specifically, Maya tatam idam sarvam jagad avyaktamurtina, and Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mayi pashyati. Together in their meanings reveal a certain sense of God that is applicable here. Cool, metaphysics, here we go. In the first half of the verse, Krishna explains that God pervades the entire universe with his indivisible feature. And in the second half verse, he explains that one who sees God everywhere and sees everything in God is a real yogi. To add a bit more nuance to these explanations, we can also include the Gita verse 629. Sarvabhuta stamatmanam sarvabhutani chatmani ikshate yoga yuktatma sarvatra samadarshana. This basically means that the yoga-linked self, so the self-realized yogi, sees God in all creatures and all creatures in God. In other words, the yogi sees the supreme self everywhere. And because God is everywhere and pervades all things, in a sense, every point in space connects to every other point in space. It's like really heady. Okay. But see, this is the kind of stuff that these quantum mechanic, astrophysicists and molecular biologists and all these people, these are the kinds of questions they're trying to answer, and they can't answer it satisfactorily. When you study these ancient texts on Vedic sacrifice, you find that the Brahmanas were able to create different fires in the sacrificial arena. Fires representing the earth, fires representing the heavenly world, fires representing the world of the forefathers, and so on. And the sacrificial arena was basically a microcosm of the universe. Think of your computer and the icons on your screen. By clicking on a particular icon, you can activate all types of things connected to that icon. In the same way, the fires within that sacrificial microcosm were almost like icons, as were the various things offered in those fires. Together, these enabled Brahmanas to connect with and access all varieties of power. For example, different mantras or different physical objects would actually become icons connected to cosmic elements like earth, water, fire, air, and ether. This, of course, is a whole other extremely elaborate topic, but this is the basic idea. So it's not just mythology, it was actually an extremely subtle and sophisticated science. Perhaps now we can better comprehend how highly trained and gifted Kshatriyas like Drona and his uncommon pupils were able to fight using mystic mantras, supercharged arrows, elemental weapons, and the like. And here's another interesting fact. In Indian culture, there is a procedure known as achaman, in which one purifies oneself with drops of water before performing puja or serving deities. Well, a similar procedure was always used by Kshatriyas just before releasing their celestial weapons. All right, I'll let you go.
Okay.
Bottom paragraph.
Two types of weapons are mentioned in the Mahabharata. Minutia weapons, which are your ordinary run-of-the-mill human weapons, and divya, celestial weapons, which are from higher dimensions. And especially when releasing these higher weapons, the text will always indicate that one must perform achman and chant certain mantras, which invoke them by connecting to powerful forces within the universe. There was even one skill or method for releasing a weapon and another for withdrawing it. Yes, one could actually pull back a weapon after it had been released. That's something you can't do with a cannonball or a bullet. The closest that modern technology has come to something like this is the ability to make missiles self-destruct or divert from an intended target into the sea. And with this, we can return to Dhritarashtra's arena, where the graduation ceremony for the Pandava and Kuru princes is taking place. As Arjuna continues exhibiting all these fantastic military abilities and powers, suddenly there's a commotion at the arena entrance as a very passionate, hostile, and angry young stranger walks to the center of the grounds, points towards Arjuna, and boldly announces, "Whatever he can do, I can do as well." The entire crowd is stunned to silence at this shocking claim. Is this guy deranged? No, not at all. The angry young man is none other than Karna, Kunti's long-abandoned son, who he last saw floating down the Ganges in a basket. This means, of course, that Karna is actually a brother to the Pandavas, although neither he nor they know it. Indeed, there's only one person on earth who knows the truth, Kunti herself, and she's not about to disclose that fact to anyone. In any case, now would be a good time to say a few words about this singular young man. In India, Karna is seen as every mother's son, in the sense that everyone feels sorry for the poor abandoned lad. And although I can also sympathize, if you actually read the Mahabharata Sanskrit text, a somewhat different picture emerges. In other words, there are a few things we need to know about Karna in order to balance our understanding. Recall that Karna was born due to Kunti's teenage union with the sun god, and was then sent floating downriver, where he was found and adopted by a very loving, childless couple. So the first point is that Karna was not unloved. To the contrary, he grew up in a tremendously loving environment. The Mahabharata's next mention of Karna is when he barges into the graduation ceremony while these young princes are performing for their families. Remember that 2 of the Pandavas were complete orphans, and the other 3 had lost their father and one of their mothers. Also, in Hastinapur, they've grown up in very difficult, even dangerous circumstances. And now Karna, for no reason that's mentioned anywhere in the Mahabharata, has singled out Arjuna as the object of his loathing and wrath. He can't stand the attention he's getting and wants to humiliate Arjuna in front of his whole family on the very day of his graduation. So this is the poor Karna that causes Indian mothers to weep. Now, I'm not trying to destroy Karna's character, because he also has many good qualities and attributes. After all, he is born of the sun god and the exalted queen Kunti. To be fair, however, Karna does have some character flaws that are simply undeniable. For instance, in his eagerness to gain power, Karna lied to the avatar Parshuram, who we've mentioned several times before. Parshuram's mission in coming to Earth was to destroy certain Kshatriya elements that were violating Dharma, after which he basically retired. Still, Parshuram had all these powerful avatar weapons, and Karna wanted to become his student. The challenge was that Parshuram had a real problem with Kshatriyas and would only teach Brahmanas. At that point, Karna lied, telling Parshuram that he himself was a Brahmana. Of course, as explained in the text, the truth eventually came out, and in a most clever way. One day, Parshuram was lying down with his head in the lap of his student when some kind of ferocious little bug began biting Karna. Not wanting to disturb his guru's sleep, Karna just clenched his teeth, tolerated the pain, and didn't say a word. When Parshuram awoke and noticed what was going on, he immediately understood that only a Kshatriya could have this type of self-command and tolerance of pain. Obviously, then, Karna was really a Kshatriya. Parshuram was furious, cursed Karna in various ways, and so on. The thing that Karna had going for him, of course, was that his birth was the most aristocratic of all Kunti's children. In Vedic culture, it is understood that all the royal families in the world, all the Kshatriyas, come down from either the sun god or the moon god. So Karna, being the direct son of Surya and the Yadu princess Kunti, was extremely aristocratic. And yet, like Satyavati, he wound up in a social situation where he was unable to act according to his stature, qualities, and birth. He was frustrated, but tried to overcome his circumstances by lying and cheating. At a later point in the Mahabharata, something will happen to the Pandavas, a circumstance in which these great warriors lose everything, including the opportunity to act as Kshatriyas. And yet we see a very different response. They don't lie or cheat. They essentially go away and dedicate themselves to self-realization. Returning to the graduation ceremony, as I already mentioned, there is not a hint anywhere in the Mahabharata that Arjuna or any of the Pandavas had ever offended Karna. Yet he entered that arena with the absolute determination to humiliate, defeat, and even kill Arjuna because, well, you almost want to use the E word. He's envious. He just can't stand Arjuna's success. The thing is that Karna not only claims but actually begins to show that he can perform as well, if not better, than Arjuna. Finally, he challenges Arjuna to a duel. Let's settle this here and now, a fight to the death. And again, Arjuna has never laid eyes on the guy in his life. Where's all this malice, this vitriol coming from? Arjuna has no idea, but it's clear that Karna has some serious issues here. They talk about them going away to the forest for self-realization or whatever when they couldn't do this, and now his was like he wanted to change his circumstances. It's like the difference between going inside for pleasure, going inside for satisfaction versus looking for outside sources. Karna thought if he was in Arjuna's shoes, he'd be happy. But then when Arjuna's in feeling misfortune, people are trying to assassinate them. They never act like that. They go within for their pleasure, within for their satisfaction. And then you see right here the flaw that, you know, Karna's a great guy in some ways, but he can't get over this idea that if he just has certain things, he'll be happy, which is not true. Then
because he's not self-realized.
Right. Then before things get too out of hand, Bhima plays the caste card and says, "Hey buddy, what's your last name? What's your gotra? Are you even a Kshatriya? Because we've never heard of you. And we know all the royal families in these parts." This leads to a very poignant moment in the Mahabharata where Karna's aging father, the chariot maker, Adira, enters the scene. A respectable guy, but nowhere in the league of the princely class. And at once, everyone realizes, oh my God, that's his father, answering the question of Karna's status. Karna, of course, is deeply mortified by the revelation. But Duryodhana, observing everything with an Asura's watchful eye, realizes, here's the man that can get me what I want. Here's the man that can kill Arjuna. So he steps forward with the most transparent of motives, suddenly becoming Monsieur Liberté Égalité, and says, well, if he's not already a king, I'll make him one now. And with that, Duryodhana immediately anoints him as king. This is interesting because the Old Testament kings were also anointed. They were anointed with oil, mashak, and the Vedic kings were anointed with water, abhishekta. So it appears that abhishekta is a Sanskrit equivalent to Messiah, the one who's been anointed. This story also illustrates that there was flexibility in the ancient Vedic caste system. Notice that when Duryodhana made Karna a king, no one stood in protest saying, wait a second, you can't just make him a king. In fact, the Vedic Brahmana literature explicitly states that despite one's birth, it is qualification that ultimately counts. And in the Gita, Krishna repeatedly maintains that one's position in the Varna system is born of one's nature, svabhavaja, and depends on one's qualities, guna, karma, vibhagasha. So Duryodhana, who had accumulated all kinds of lands under his father, immediately anointed Karna and made him the king of Anga, some remote place out there in the Kuru boondocks. But what's interesting here is that Karna never once visited Anga, which is not entirely uncommon in these sorts of circumstances. If you study the history of the Japanese monarchy, for example, you'll find that while certain rulers were technically in charge of this or that province, they never actually visited there. Instead, they hung out in the emperor's palace, the center of state affairs. Karna was like that. Indeed, there's no mention anywhere in the Mahabharata of Karna ever setting foot in Anga. He's rather always seen hanging around Duryodhana. In any case, now that Karna has been made part of the kingly class, he can legitimately challenge Arjuna to a fight. Unfortunately, the fight is canceled on account of rain. What happens is that Surya, the sun god, and Indra, the rain god, see that their sons are heading for conflict. So they create this major weather event that disperses the crowd and ends the ceremony. There will be no fight today, but the battle lines have been clearly drawn. With Karna now on board for the Kurus, Duryodhana becomes more confident and emboldened, believing that he can now defeat the Pandavas. It's a brand new day, and he's ready to resume and even intensify the old assassination game. He comes up with what he thinks is a foolproof plan for getting rid of the Pandavas once and for all. And if it's discovered or goes awry, there's always Karna waiting in the wings to protect him. Earlier, when Duryodhana was
a sneaky dude.
Yeah. When Duryodhana was young.
I mean, he's really quite crafty.
Yeah, he is.
He's a very astute politician. Yeah.
Yep. Earlier, when Duryodhana was younger and first tried killing Bhima, Dhritarashtra had found out what his son was up to, and yet there were no consequences or repercussions. It was more like, don't do that again, or at least don't get caught. Now, years later, Duryodhana again approaches his father with a more modest proposal. If I had just 1 year without the presence of the Pandavas, 1 year with full authority over the Kuru treasury, 1 year with the power to grant awards and promotions, bribe generals, and secure alliances with other kingdoms, I could easily gain control of the entire Kuru kingdom. To this, Dhritarashtra essentially replied, go for it. In reality, though, Duryodhana has something far more sinister in mind. One thing becomes apparent when reading ancient Indian political texts. They were really into espionage. Theirs was a spy-intensive political culture. So Duryodhana instructs some of his agents to spread the rumor that somewhere toward the north of the Kuru kingdom, in the foothills, where it's cooler in the summer, there's this fabulous new resort called Varanavata. Soon all of Hastinapur is abuzz with the news. Have you heard about Varanavata? Of course, we're planning on a trip this summer. Well, we've just got to go. I hear it's really amazing. In this way, gradually,
We
everywhere
have a
in the kingdom-
timeshare there.
Yeah. It's Varanavata this and Varanavata that. Varanavata, the new destination of choice. Of course, the Pandavas also eventually hear that there's this great new location, Varanavata. So one day, Dhritarashtra, in consort with Duryodhana, calls the Pandavas into his chambers and says, you know, everybody's talking about Varanavata. I think maybe you kids should go take a vacation there. How does a year sound to you? The Pandavas agree. And here it's important to remember that these 5 boys grew up as yogis, as sages, and they were still extremely innocent and naive. Dhritarashtra was their father by dharma. So the idea that he could desire their harm or that they could refuse to obey him was entirely inconceivable at this point in their lives. The culture back then was that strong. In fact, even a few years ago, when children in India would write letters to their father, they would begin Puja Pitaji, worshipful father. Worshipable father.
Wow.
It's still a very strong culture even today. So imagine what it was like thousands of years ago. Of course, once the Pandavas agree, Duryodhana puts the more sinister and secret aspect of his plot into motion. He instructs a cohort named Provocateur, one of his darker agents, to go to Varanavata and build a special house for the Pandavas, a very nice house that in reality will be a deadly fire trap. He tells Provocateur to build with every available flammable material so that the house will just burst into flames and consume everyone inside. And this is precisely what Provocateur does. If anything, Provocateur is worse than Duryodhana. Fortunately for the Pandavas, their good uncle Vidura discovers the plot at the last minute, just as the princes are making their way out of the city, accompanied by crowds of people who have come to see them off with great fanfare, celebration, and pomp. Vidura makes his way toward his nephews. He needs to pull them aside and tell them what he knows, but with caution, since half the people in the crowd are Duryodhana's spies, and Duryodhana himself is also lurking about. He can't tell it to them straight, since he might be overheard, and he can't send someone later, since he has no idea when the fire will occur. What if it's on day 1? No, he has to tell them now. But how? Vidura's solution is to deliver the message in a type of Vedic jive talk called Nirikavacha, a language of the lower classes. He goes up to Yudhishthira and starts explaining things in this obscure language that almost no one understands. Yet even then, he fears that if he's too explicit, someone in the crowd may figure it out. So he speaks to Yudhishthira in very indirect and cryptic terms. One is not in danger who knows that fire cannot burn the soul. One can find his way who knows the stars. As oblique as these statements might seem, they were enough for Yudhishthira, who was very bright and thoroughly trained to be an extremely shrewd and clever warrior. From Vidura's Milekavacha, he immediately knew there'd be an assassination attempt by fire, and they would have to escape at night. Wow, that's impressive. With that, the Pandavas leave for Varanavata, where Provocateur awaits, the assassin who will ignite their tinderbox house when they least expect it, killing them all in the process. To do the job, he has housed himself next door in an armory where weapons are stored. And here's the tricky part. Even though the Pandavas know of the plot to burn their house, they can't just pack up and leave, since this would alert Duryodhana, who would immediately come after them with the whole Kuru army, now under his full control. The situation is very tense. The Pandavas know that an attempt will be made on their lives, but they don't know when, and they can't let Duryodhana know that they know, so leaving in plain sight isn't an option. They're effectively stuck in a fire trap, waiting for the trap to spring, or in this case, ignite. Is it checkmate for the Pandavas or only check? You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out.
Bro, this is like I'm telling you, we got to read when his version of the Mahabharata comes out. We got to read it. We should do a we should do a dramatic reading or something when his version comes out, because
for sure
this is like a 6-season finale episode from Game of Thrones. I mean, the drama, the intrigue, it's so good, but there's so much more woven into it, you know.
Yeah, well, he does a good job of drawing parallels and explaining it in a way that's very understandable, very makes you can at least suspend your disbelief enough to understand what's going on. The way he explains it, it's easy to get to a certain place with it.
For sure. I mean, no, it's really good. Ooh.
Yeah, that was good.
Anyway,
I know you got to get your kids soon.
I feel like we did have a pretty good talk there earlier.
Yeah.
I'm happy we did this. We got to do it again.
Yeah, this is good.
Next weekend I'm supposed to have 4 days off. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be off the normal amount of days next week. But I mean, we'll make it work either virtually or in person, depending on what's going on for us. But I think this worked out well enough. Now that you have the new headphones and stuff, I think the sound quality is good enough. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you guys.
Thank you for listening. Let us know as always. Don't forget to like, follow, share with a friend, and we'll see you next week.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.